My wife left me for a titan of industry, but the secret I kept, the real power behind his empire, just started a war. The porcelain coffee mug felt cold against my palm, a stark contrast to the brewing inferno inside my chest. I watched the steam curl lazily toward the kitchen ceiling, mimicking the way my sanity was currently dissipating into thin, useless air. It had been 3 weeks since Sarah walked out. 3 weeks since she packed 2 suitcases, kissed our bewildered golden retriever Buster on the head, and told me with the detached precision of a seasoned surgeon delivering bad news that she needed more. More what, Sarah? I'd asked, the question tasting like ash. We have a mortgage, a retirement fund. Buster needs new orthopedic dog biscuits. What precisely is lacking? Her eyes, once the startling blue of a clear summer sky, were now the flat, opaque gray of a winter sea. You're stagnant, Alex. You're safe. And frankly, she'd paused, smoothing the lapel of a blazer I recognized instantly, the expensive Italian cashmere one she'd worn to the annual Apex Innovations Gala last year. I'm in love with someone who challenges me. That someone was, of course, Richard Thorne. Thorne, CEO of Apex Innovations, Sarah's employer for the last 7 years, and the man who had just green-lit the development phase for Project Chimera, a breakthrough in scalable, sustainable energy storage that the entire industry was buzzing about. Richard Thorne, 20 years my senior, with the slicked-back silver hair and the predatory handshake that always left my palm clammy. Sarah hadn't just left me. She'd left me for the man who held my wife's career in his perfectly manicured hands. It was the most cliché, soul-crushingly predictable betrayal imaginable. I'd spent the first week in a fog of cheap whiskey and reruns, occasionally letting Buster lick the tears off my face. The second week was dedicated to drafting increasingly furious, yet unsent, text messages to Sarah. The third week, however, was when the fog began to lift, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. It wasn't the marriage I was mourning. It was the sheer, insulting unfairness of the situation. Sarah got the house, the Volvo, and the superficial satisfaction of bedding the titan of industry. Richard Thorne got the prestige of launching Chimera, the project that would cement his legacy and net him billions, and Sarah his beautiful, ambitious new accessory. What they both failed to account for in their whirlwind of illicit lunches and whispered promises in the executive washroom was the small, dusty filing cabinet tucked away in the back corner of my home office. That cabinet held the physical manifestation of my stagnation, my actual work, my intellectual property. You see, I wasn't just Alex, the quiet guy who works from home developing software patches for Apex. That was my consulting gig, the steady retainer that paid for Buster's biscuits and Sarah's wardrobe. My real work, the thing I poured my soul into between 2 a.m. and dawn, was theoretical physics translated into applied, proprietary algorithms, specifically the core power management system for Project Chimera. When Richard first approached me 3 years ago, desperate for an edge, I drafted a preliminary licensing agreement. He wanted the backbone of the system, the piece that made the whole battery structure not just efficient but revolutionary. I gave him the framework, the foundational architecture, the mathematical blueprint for the entire energy conversion process. He signed a contract granting Apex exclusive licensing rights for the initial implementation of the design, provided the project launched within 36 months. The problem for Thorne was that I hadn't delivered the final iteration. I delivered version 1.0, the concept. The version that, while brilliant, was also inherently unstable under extreme temperature fluctuations. It was functional enough for testing, good enough for securing early investment rounds, and certainly good enough to fool a man as arrogant as Richard Thorne into believing he had successfully poached all the necessary genius. But I held version 2.7, the patched, optimized, absolutely foolproof algorithm that could stabilize the entire output and actually bring the product to market without causing catastrophic failures. And, critically, the contract was maddeningly specific about the version number he licensed. It mentioned the provisional patent filing number, which I had meticulously ensured only referenced the foundational, flawed architecture. I opened the laptop, the screen illuminating my grim face. I bypassed the standard security protocols. They were amateur hour compared to what I dealt with daily, and navigated straight to the Apex Innovations internal servers, using a backdoor I'd built into the very networking hub I installed for them 2 years ago. I pulled up the detailed specifications for Chimera, cross-referencing the projected launch date against the licensing agreement deadline. They were pushing the launch forward by 3 weeks, rushing it. Thorne was hungry, and Sarah's presence seemed to have injected him with a toxic level of overconfidence. He was planning a grand unveiling, a presentation to the board and the Department of Energy, all scheduled for the 15th of next month. My heart hammered against my ribs. If they launched with version 1.0, the system would either fail spectacularly during the demonstration, wiping out billions in investment, or more likely, it would work just well enough to look promising before melting down 2 weeks later, ruining Thorne's reputation forever. I had the fail-safe. I had the key to his kingdom and the antidote to his impending disaster. And I had Sarah sleeping in his ridiculously oversized penthouse suite, likely waking up next to him dreaming of stock options. I minimized the server window and opened my encrypted email client. I needed to send a very specific message, one that would stop their momentum dead in its tracks. I typed out 3 words to Sarah's personal, non-work email, a habit she hadn't bothered to change, and hesitated before hitting send. It was the opening shot in a war I never wanted to fight, but one I was now ruthlessly prepared to win. The email blinked, waiting. I thought about Sarah's face when she told me she didn't love me anymore. I thought about Thorne's smug superiority. I clenched my jaw, took a deep breath of the stale morning air, and pressed send. A second later, my phone buzzed violently. It wasn't an expected response from Sarah. It was an automated security alert from my own home network. Someone was attempting to access the external hard drive where I stored the physical copies of the real intellectual property, the documentation for version 2.7. Someone who clearly knew what I had hidden, and someone who was trying to get it before I could use it. My blood ran ice cold. Who knew I had the final iteration saved here? And how did they bypass my perimeter defenses? They weren't trying to hack my main system. They were targeting the physical backup, the one I had never connected to the network. My eyes snapped toward the locked, reinforced steel door leading to the basement vault, where that drive sat, humming quietly in the dark. And then I saw it, a tiny, almost invisible scratch on the pristine white paint near the deadbolt, a mark I had never noticed before, suggesting someone had already tried to pick the lock. The scratch. It was infinitesimally small, almost lost in the texture of the paint, but in the harsh morning light slanting through the kitchen window, it looked like a deliberate, razor-thin scar. My professional paranoia, usually reserved for debugging faulty server code, screamed into overdrive. This wasn't a random burglar. This was targeted. Someone knew about the vault, and more importantly, someone knew that the true leverage, version 2.7, was physically stored, not just digitally. I immediately killed the coffee maker, the sudden silence deafening. Sarah, predictably, had a copy of the vault key, a heavy, old-fashioned brass thing I insisted on keeping, a sentimental relic from my grandfather, who was also an engineer. But she'd left it on the silver ring next to the key rack. I checked. The ring was there, untouched. So how? My mind raced through the possibilities, each one more chilling than the last. If it wasn't Sarah using her physical key, it meant they had already bypassed the lock, or worse, they possessed a duplicate I didn't know existed. The alarm system, a state-of-the-art biometric setup I'd installed myself, was showing green across the board. No forced entry detected. This wasn't a smash and grab. This was espionage with a terrifyingly intimate knowledge of my home security protocols. I didn't waste time calling the police. They'd treat it as a potential misunderstanding until the vault was actually breached. I needed to secure the actual data now. I bolted down the basement stairs, my bare feet slapping against the cold concrete. The vault door was thick steel, bolted from the inside, requiring a 4-digit code that changed weekly. I keyed in the current sequence, my fingers flying over the keypad, praying the subtle vibrations from the attempted entry hadn't triggered an internal lockdown sequence that might trap me inside. The heavy bolts hissed back, and I pulled the door open. The small room inside was my sanctuary, climate-controlled, shielded from EMPs and housing only 2 things: a high-security server rack containing my personal research archives, unrelated to Chimera, and the reinforced Pelican case containing the external drive of 2.7. The Pelican case was secured by a small integrated digital lock, requiring a separate complex cryptographic handshake. I flicked the latch open. The case lid opened with a satisfying pneumatic sigh. The drive was gone. The heavy military-grade SSD, usually nestled securely in its foam cradle, was missing. The foam was slightly disturbed, the cradle indented where the drive had been. No shattered locks, no forced entry on the case itself. Whoever did this was not only skilled, but sickeningly efficient. They had the code, or they had bypassed that security layer as well. The initial fury that had fueled my morning evaporated, replaced by a suffocating dread. The email I'd sent Sarah, the one warning her about the impending disaster of the rushed launch, was now a liability, not leverage. If the thief got the email before the launch date, they would know that someone possessed the true algorithm. They would realize the drive they stole contained the ultimate prize, and they would try to sell it, or worse, use it to discredit Thorne before I could publicly reveal my control over the situation. I slammed the Pelican case shut, the sound echoing hollowly in the small room. I backed out of the vault, slammed the heavy door, and re-engaged the bolts, the electronic readout flashing green, indicating perfect security, a security that was clearly a lie. I rushed back upstairs, grabbing my phone. I had to contact the only person who understood the technical landscape of Apex Innovations as well as I did, the only person who might have spotted unusual activity on the periphery of Thorne's R&D budget that might point to industrial espionage aimed at me. I scrolled past Sarah's contact, a ghost now, and landed on Mark Jensen. Mark was my former protege, a brilliant young coder who'd burned out spectacularly at Apex 18 months ago, quitting in a messy public spat with Thorne over intellectual ownership rights. Mark hated Thorne even more passionately than I did, and he had the paranoia necessary to watch his back. I dialed. It rang twice before Mark picked up, his voice already tense. "Alex? What is it? Did you see my email?" he hissed, skipping any pleasantries. "What email, Mark? I just sent one to Sarah, but forget that for a second. Someone just cleaned out my physical backup drive containing the full Chimera optimization code, version 2.7, from my vault. A long silence stretched across the line, broken only by the static hiss of the connection. Mark finally let out a short, sharp, humorless laugh. "Alex, you idiot, I didn't email you about Chimera. I emailed you 3 hours ago because I saw Thorne's head of internal security, that Viper Harrison, pulling massive, unauthorized surveillance logs from the old Apex employee database, specifically targeting your personal financial records from the last 5 years. They weren't looking for Sarah's affair. They were looking for the paper trail that proved you didn't sell them everything. They knew you held back." My stomach plummeted. They hadn't waited for my email. They had acted preemptively based on internal suspicions. They'd moved to eliminate the threat before I could deploy the payload. "Mark, the drive is gone. They broke in. They have 2.7. "No, Alex." Mark's voice dropped, tight with real fear now. "Harrison doesn't break in. He sends proxies. If Harrison is involved, that means this is bigger than just Thorne trying to save face. And the email I sent you wasn't about the logs. It was a warning. I tracked a massive, untraceable wire transfer originating from a holding company registered in the Caymans, a company I recognize. It was wired to an offshore account owned by a very specific individual who disappeared from the tech scene 5 years ago after a massive patent lawsuit. Who, Mark? Who would want my algorithm enough to break into my house?" I demanded, pacing wildly, trying to think where I could possibly run or hide, the critical data that was no longer physically with me. "The recipient of that transfer, Alex, it's Victor Krell. Krell. The man who lost the entire SolarTech patent portfolio to Thorne in that hostile takeover 7 years ago. Krell is coming back, and he isn't coming for a partnership. He's coming to destroy Thorne's biggest win, and now he has the key, your key. And here's the part you need to hear before Harrison's cleanup crew gets to you. Krell's first public move, according to the encrypted message I intercepted, is to use the stolen algorithm to launch a counter patent against Apex Innovations in less than 48 hours. If he succeeds, Thorne loses Chimera, you lose the credit, and Krell walks away with everything." My phone vibrated again, this time a text message from an unrecognized number. It wasn't Sarah. It was an image. The photo was grainy, taken in low light, but unmistakable. Buster, my golden retriever, sitting patiently in a sterile white room, a thick, padded muzzle covering his gentle mouth. Beneath the picture was a single line of text. "You have 24 hours to transfer all remaining claims to the V2.7 IP to this address, or the dog gets retired early." The image of Buster, my loyal, goofy shadow, transformed into a hostage, hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air punched out of my lungs, and for a terrible second, I couldn't remember how to breathe. My carefully constructed, ice-cold analytical shell shattered. This wasn't a corporate chess match anymore. This was primal. This was Victor Krell, the ghost of Thorne's past, playing dirty, leveraging the only weakness I had ever allowed myself to possess. "Mark, they have Buster," I managed to choke out, the words ragged. Mark's practiced calm vanished instantly. "What? Alex, who?" "Krell. He sent a picture. They took him from the house while I was downstairs. They know I'm the only one who can authenticate the IP, and they're using him as collateral before they file that counter patent." I stared wildly around my empty living room, seeing now not a home, but a highly vulnerable access point. The scratch on the vault door suddenly seemed like a careless mistake, a beacon left flashing for Krell's operatives. "Listen to me, Alex," Mark commanded, his voice regaining focus, the sound of a true ally. Krell is predictable in his viciousness, but he's not always fast. If he has the drive, he'll spend the next few hours trying to decrypt the proprietary encryption wrapper I helped you build around the code before you uploaded it to the vault. He won't have the decryption key yet. That key is stored on a separate offline server cluster I maintain, the one he doesn't know about. The one you use for your personal simulations? The one in Vermont? I asked, relief, thin and sharp, cutting through the panic. Exactly. He has the treasure chest, but he doesn't have the key to open the lockbox inside it. That gives us a window. You need to get to Vermont. Now. I can give you remote access to monitor Krell's decryption attempts, but you need to get physical access to that key server before Krell's legal team files that counter patent. If that patent is filed, even if you show the courts you hold the true IP, the legal entanglement alone will destroy Chimera's viability for years. Thorn goes down, and Krell wins by default. The logistics were impossible. Vermont was a 5-hour drive, minimum, and I was currently operating on 3 hours of sleep and pure adrenaline. I had maybe 20 hours before Krell's legal team finalized their paperwork, assuming they hadn't already drafted it. I need a car, Mark, and I need to secure this house. If Harrison knows about Buster, he knows about the house. He'll be sending people to clean up any loose ends, including me, once he realizes Krell has poached his bargaining chip. Forget the house. That's a lost cause. I'm pulling up traffic cams. There's a private airstrip 30 minutes from you, the old defunct municipal field. I can bribe a pilot for an immediate charter flight south, then we route you up to Burlington. It'll cost every penny you have left, Alex. Done, I said, grabbing my go bag. A battered hiking pack containing a satellite phone, hard drives containing my personal coding portfolio, useless now, but habit, and my passport. I didn't spare a glance for the kitchen or the living room. Sarah's memory was already being incinerated by the need to save Buster. As I raced toward the front door, I paused. I had to leave a message for Sarah, not a plea, not an accusation, but a final, indelible statement of my control. I snatched a dry erase marker from the fridge and scrawled one word across the pristine white whiteboard where Sarah used to write grocery lists. Patents. I burst out the front door, slamming it behind me, and jumped into my aging sedan. Mark was already navigating me through the labyrinth of back roads to the private airstrip, his voice a lifeline in the chaos. 20 minutes later, the tires of the sedan squealed onto the cracked asphalt of the forgotten airstrip. A small, single-engine Cessna was waiting, the pilot looking distinctly uncomfortable as he eyed my frantic appearance. As I was strapping myself into the cramped passenger seat, my phone buzzed again. It wasn't Mark, and it wasn't Krell. It was an encrypted message from a shielded Apex server, a route I didn't even know existed. The sender ID was redacted, but the content was chillingly specific. It was a video file. I clicked play, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. The video showed Richard Thorne, sitting alone in his cavernous, glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline. He wasn't looking triumphant. He looked terrified. He was talking directly into the camera, his face pale beneath the harsh office lights. Alex, if you're seeing this, it means Krell has made his move, and he has Sarah, Thorne whispered urgently, glancing nervously over his shoulder. He didn't just want the algorithm, he wanted leverage against us. He's holding her captive at an abandoned Apex testing facility upstate, the old Hydrodyne site. He's demanding that you sign over the rights to Krell, not transfer them, Alex. Sign them over to Sarah. He's framing her as the true inventor. If you don't comply by the time the patent office opens tomorrow morning, he's going to destroy the drive publicly, file his spurious claim, and then ensure Sarah takes the fall for corporate espionage when the whole thing unravels. Thorne's eyes pleaded with the camera. "I can give you a clean slate, Alex. Immunity, full royalties, whatever you want. But you have to help me. Krell is inside the Hydrodyne facility right now, waiting for your signature. If you go after Buster, Sarah is dead, and Krell gets away with everything. If you save Sarah, you save Chimera." I stared at the screen, the Cessna engine roaring impatiently beside me. I had a choice forced upon me by two separate villains. Go south to Vermont to save my dog and claim my full rightful ownership, or drive north toward the Hydrodyne site to save my unfaithful wife and secure my legacy under Thorne's dubious protection. The clock was ticking on both fronts, and the fate of Buster, Sarah, and Project Chimera hung on a single impossible decision. As the pilot began to rev the propeller higher, preparing for takeoff, I realized I couldn't do both. I had to choose which life, or which piece of intellectual property, was worth sacrificing. I looked down at the satellite tracker Mark had sent me. The location for Buster in Vermont was a bright green dot stationary. The location for Sarah at the Hydrodyne site was a pulsing red dot, signaling active movement, suggesting Krell was preparing for immediate departure or execution. My hand instinctively reached for the ignition switch on the Cessna's console, ready to cut the engine. I couldn't leave. If I left, Buster was guaranteed to die, and Krell would win the IP war uncontested. But if I stayed, Sarah was almost certainly lost, and I'd be forever tied to Thorne. Then, my gaze drifted to the faint, lingering image of Sarah's panicked face on Thorne's video, and a cold, hard certainty settled in my gut. She had chosen her path, but Buster hadn't chosen mine. Just as the pilot revved the engine to full throttle for takeoff, a blinding flash of light erupted from the north, from the direction of the Hydrodyne facility, followed by a deep, distant, muffled explosion that shook the very ground beneath the Cessna's wheels. The distant seismic thump registered a full second after the flash, a signature rumble that screamed of energy discharge, the kind of uncontrolled energy release I had spent years trying to prevent in Chimera's design. The pilot, startled, throttled back immediately, bringing the Cessna sputtering violently to a near halt on the tarmac. "What the hell was that?" the pilot yelled over the suddenly quiet engine, peering nervously toward the horizon where a thick column of black smoke was already beginning to unfurl against the blue sky. My mind raced to connect the dots. Thorne said Krell was holding Sarah at the Hydrodyne site and demanding a signature by morning. That explosion, it wasn't a signal. It felt like an outcome. Had Thorne tried a desperate preemptive strike against Krell, or had Krell, impatient and ruthless, simply tested his destructive capabilities by overloading an old Apex experimental reactor on site? Either way, the red dot on my tracking app was now stationary, its signal suddenly weak and intermittent. Sarah, and potentially Krell himself, were now buried under whatever debris that explosion created. Mark's frantic voice broke through the satellite phone static. "Alex, did you see the feed? That was Hydrodyne. It's gone dark. Alex, they weren't testing a battery. They were building something else entirely. A prototype containment field for their next big project. Krell must have triggered a failure cascade." "Buster, Mark, tell me about Buster." My voice was unnervingly calm, the focus narrowing entirely onto the green dot in Vermont. If Sarah was gone, if Krell was incapacitated, then the IP on the stolen drive was the only leverage left, but I still didn't have the decryption key. The Vermont server is stable. Krell's decryption attempt failed. He's still locked out of the inner layer, but his team is escalating brute force attacks. They know they have the hardware, they just need the password. Alex, you have to get here. If Krell's secondary team figures out the encryption is too robust, they might abandon the drive and pivot entirely to filing that fraudulent patent based on the flawed v1.0 data they thought they were getting, using the news of the Hydrodyne incident as cover. A massive failure that implicates Thorne, opening the door for Krell's superior foundational design to appear legitimate. The path was terrifyingly clear. The explosion at Hydrodyne, whether Krell's doing or Thorne's sabotage, had effectively neutralized the Sarah leverage point. If Thorne was still alive, he was likely reeling, focused on damage control regarding the catastrophic failure he hadn't managed to hide. This created a vacuum of authority at Apex, a perfect moment for Krell to strike with the fraudulent patent. My only chance now was absolute verifiable proof of ownership over the true technology, version 2.7, and that meant accessing the decryption key in Vermont before Krell's brute force attacks broke through, or before Thorne managed to rally his legal team based on the initial, incomplete data. Mark, turn this plane around. Forget the traffic. Fly us directly to Burlington. I'm going to Vermont. Tell me everything Krell is trying to crack on that drive, every weak point in the wrapper. The pilot reluctantly agreed, banking the small aircraft north. As we ascended, the smoke from Hydrodyne became a stark black smudge against the landscape, a monument to corporate warfare and betrayal. 4 grueling hours later, I was in a rented Jeep, speeding through the crisp Vermont air toward the isolated cabin Mark used for his server cluster. Mark was on a secure line, feeding me live data feeds of Krell's increasingly desperate attempts. He cycled through 3 major cryptographic protocols in the last hour, Alex. They're getting slower. He must be running out of processing power, or he's getting paranoid about leaving a digital footprint that Thorne's remaining forensics team could trace back to him, Mark analyzed grimly. But the firewall you set up around the decryption key module is a beast. It requires a physical biometric scan and a rotating 6-digit code that changes every 15 minutes. Krell has the drive. He doesn't have your thumbprint or the code. We arrived at the remote, rustic cabin. Mark's server cluster was housed in a specialized, heavily reinforced outbuilding behind the main house, disguised as a woodshed. The air here felt clean, isolated, a stark contrast to the toxic atmosphere of the city I had just fled. I located the heavy steel door of the server shed. Inside, rows of blinking lights indicated the massive computational power working tirelessly, guarding my future. I punched in the override sequence Mark provided and pulled the door open. The internal room was humming loudly. There, mounted beside the main server rack, was a sleek black pedestal holding the biometric scanner and the small digital display for the rotating code. I pressed my thumb onto the scanner. Success. The display flashed green, but the 6-digit code remained stubbornly locked. Mark, the code won't initiate. I'm scanned, but the rotational sequence hasn't engaged. Damn it, Alex. That's a fail-safe I forgot to mention. The rotational code feed relies on an external network heartbeat, a constant verified data stream to ensure the server location hasn't been compromised. It's looking for the official Apex R&D timestamp feed to verify its own time lock. Krell must have anticipated this. He didn't just steal the drive. He's attempting to feed a spoofed, corrupted timestamp signal to this server cluster to freeze the rotation, hoping to buy himself days to brute force the rest of the encryption. My blood ran cold again. Krell wasn't just trying to decrypt the drive. He was trying to create a time paradox for my key server, locking me out permanently while he kept working on the stolen data. Can you break the spoof, Mark? Can you feed it the real Apex timestamp? I can't spoof the corporate signal without tripping alarms across every server I've ever touched, Alex. I need the real one. And the real one would have been streaming live from Thorne's main server hub, the one that just exploded. We were at a stalemate. The drive was locked by Krell, and the key to unlock the drive was locked by a missing signal. And somewhere, Buster was still being held captive by Krell's remaining operatives, waiting for my submission to a man who was now likely dead or incapacitated. Suddenly, the digital display on the biometric pedestal, the one that was supposed to be waiting for Mark's signal, flickered back to life. The display cleared the error message and began to count down from 1500. "Mark, the rotation has started. 15 minutes. The signal must have cleared, or Krell's spoof failed," I shouted, my heart leaping with desperate hope. "No, Alex, wait. If the feed cleared, it means the system has reverted to its absolute final, fail-safe protocol, the one you designed in case of total grid failure. That protocol doesn't rely on Apex timestamps. It reverts to the oldest, most reliable external reference point for system synchronization, the original installation date of the entire network backbone." "Which is?" I urged, my fingers hovering over the keypad, ready to input the code that would give me the key and save Buster. Mark's voice was laced with sheer terror. "It reverts to the date of the SolarTech acquisition settlement, the day Krell lost everything. Alex, the rotational code is no longer random. It's based on that exact date, calculated against the current server time. If you input the wrong date sequence, the system doesn't just lock. It triggers a complete remote wipe of the encryption key, rendering the drive useless forever. You have exactly 15 minutes to calculate and input the correct sequence based on Krell's defining defeat, or you lose everything." I looked down at the digital countdown. 14:58. I frantically searched my memory, trying to recall the specific, heavily obfuscated date of the settlement that had ruined Victor Krell, the date that now held the key to my freedom, and the only leverage I had left against Thorne. I knew the year, but the exact day and month were buried under layers of irrelevant legal filings, files I hadn't bothered to keep after I delivered the V1.0 framework to Thorne. My mind was a blank slate of panic. Then, a small leather-bound notebook, a gift from Sarah years ago which I used for doodling complex mathematical notations, slid off a shelf above the pedestal, falling open directly onto the floor. The page it landed on wasn't one of my frantic scribbles. It was a photograph, a picture of Sarah and Richard Thorne cutting a ceremonial ribbon at the Apex R&D Center. Underneath the photo, Sarah had written in elegant cursive, "Happy anniversary, Rich. Remembering the day you finally crushed your last real rival." October 14th. The date. October 14th. It was Sarah's anniversary gift to Thorne, a commemoration of his victory over Krell, written on a page I had previously dismissed as sentimental fluff. In that moment, the photo wasn't a reminder of my wife's betrayal. It was a lifeline thrown from the wreckage of my old life. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. 14:30 on the timer. I didn't have time to cross-reference the exact server time against the settlement date. I had to gamble on the most obvious interpretation. Krell's defining defeat was the anniversary of the acquisition. I lunged for the pedestal, my fingers flying across the input pad. I punched in the numerical representation of October 14th, 1014, and followed it with the current year's server synchronization offset, a calculation Mark had drilled into me for disaster recovery scenarios. It was a pure, desperate guess based on Sarah's forced sentimentality. The screen flashed violently. Instead of the expected green success confirmation, a harsh, pulsing red warning appeared. Sequence error, reverting to destruct protocol in a 60 seconds. Mark, it failed. It's initiating the remote wipe. I screamed into the phone, my voice cracking with despair. All that work, all that leverage, reduced to dust in 60 seconds because Sarah had chosen a sentimental date for Thorne. "Alex, stop! Don't touch anything!" Mark shouted back. "The system recognized the input but flagged it as compromised. It's protecting the key. It thinks Krell is still in the loop. You need to override the sequence recognition using the real tiebreaker, the one thing Krell never knew existed." "What tiebreaker?" I pleaded, watching the timer drop. 45 seconds. If I didn't stop the sequence buster, the stolen IP and any chance of proving my own genius would vanish. "The personal identifier. You built a secondary failsafe into the system architecture, a failsafe that only responds to a true, positive external confirmation of your physical presence before the wipe command initiates. It's based on the last successful, non-work-related IP transfer you made before you even started on Chimera, the one that proved you weren't a corporate shill." I closed my eyes, forcing every memory to the forefront. The first legitimate contract I ever signed, the one that set me up as an independent consultant. It wasn't the Apex retainer. It was the small initial contract with a tiny renewable energy startup in Oregon, filed 3 years before Chimera. The confirmation of that transfer, the IP address of that first client, was the ultimate proof of my independent identity. I pulled up the external network diagnostics on my laptop, bypassing the pedestal screen, using the raw network connection Mark had opened for me. I had to manually inject the old IP address, a string of numbers I hadn't looked at in years, directly into the system's verification buffer. The countdown hit 15 seconds. My fingers blurred across the keyboard, inputting the ancient IP address, a random sequence that felt impossibly long. I hit enter just as the screen flashed. Wipe sequence engaged. T-5 seconds. The server room hummed, then shuddered. The aggressive red warning vanished. The timer froze at 0003, and then with a satisfying final click, the screen switched to brilliant emerald green. Access granted. Decryption key engaged. "Mark, I'm in. The key is active." "Alex, fantastic. Now get the decryption utility loaded. Krell's team is going to realize their spoof failed any second." I didn't need to be told twice. I uploaded the small, complex decryption utility from my laptop to the server cluster. The process began immediately, the server lights surging with activity. I watched the progress bar crawl agonizingly slowly toward 100%. 10 minutes later, the screen announced, "Version 2.7 decryption complete. All files secured." I immediately initiated the counter-move Mark and I had planned, a full authenticated data package detailing the true version 2.7 architecture, cross-referenced with the original provisional patent filings, sent directly to the Department of Energy's Technology Review Board, Thorne's lead board members, and, crucially, to Victor Krell's legal counsel. All time-stamped to arrive 5 minutes before Krell's fraudulent patent could be processed. The sheer, undeniable proof of my original, superior work hit the relevant parties simultaneously. The leverage was no longer theoretical. It was documented, verified fact. Then I turned my attention to the final threat. I logged into the communication channel Krell had used to send the photo of Buster. I sent a single, encrypted message back. Buster is safe. Krell's extortion attempt failed. Here is the file showing that V1.0, the technology you currently hold, is fundamentally flawed and dangerous. If you harm the dog, I release V2.7 directly into the public domain. You will have nothing. The response was immediate, coming not from the original extortionist, but from an unknown Apex IP address, Thorne's personal network, somehow still operational despite the chaos. Alex, I see the transfer. You win. Krell's team is scattered. He was neutralized in the blast at Hydrodyne. Sarah, she's gone. Come back. We need to secure the patents together, officially. You and I. I'll cut you in for 40% of all future royalties. Consider it hazard pay. I'll have Buster waiting for you at the executive terminal in an hour. Thorne, ever the survivor, was already trying to stitch his shattered empire back together, using my loyalty and my genius as the thread. I looked around the cold, humming server room. Buster was safe, but only because I had gambled everything on a photo scribbled by the woman who betrayed me. Thorne thought he could buy me back. That 40% was enough to soothe the sting of intellectual theft and emotional devastation. I accessed the external drive that Krell had stolen. It was still connected to the server cluster, awaiting my command. I pulled up the core files of version 2.7. I didn't need Thorne anymore. I didn't need Apex. I had the true foundation of scalable energy storage, and I had the undisputed proof that I, Alex Vance, was the architect. I opened the command prompt, ignoring Thorne's desperate pleas, still blinking on my laptop screen. I typed in the final command, the one that would change everything, not just for me, but for the world. I didn't send the file to Thorne or the DOE. I sent it to an open-source repository, tagged with a simple, non-proprietary license that made the foundational mathematics accessible to every engineer and researcher globally, forever free from corporate control. The progress bar filled instantly. The deed was done. I disconnected the satellite phone and walked out of the server shed, locking the heavy door behind me. As I turned to leave the cabin grounds, the Jeep's GPS chimed, routing me toward the nearest animal shelter, which Mark had apparently flagged as the emergency holding site for recovered assets. I drove toward the shelter, picturing Buster's familiar, happy face. I had lost my wife, nearly lost my life, destroyed Thorne's impending victory, and dismantled the entire concept of proprietary control over the solution that could save the planet. I was walking away with nothing but a suitcase full of salvaged code and a very confused dog. I pulled up to the shelter entrance, a small, unassuming brick building. As I stepped out of the Jeep, a familiar figure emerged from the front office, walking briskly toward me. It wasn't an attendant. It was Sarah. She looked haggard, covered in soot, but undeniably alive, clutching a heavy, singed briefcase. She stopped 10 feet from me, her blue eyes wet but determined. "Alex," she whispered, her voice raw. "I didn't die in the blast. Krell dragged me out before the main reactor blew. He was furious that you didn't sign. He was about to kill me when Thorne's security team, Harrison's remnants, showed up. It was chaos. They killed Krell's remaining men. I only survived because I grabbed this." She held up the scorched briefcase. This wasn't Krell's. This was Thorne's emergency backup of the original version 1.0 licensing agreement, the one that clearly states your name is listed as the sole inventor, filed 3 months before our wedding. Thorne kept it here, hidden, as his personal insurance against you going rogue. He sent me here, Alex. He's offering me a deal, full immunity and the chance to testify that Thorne coerced me into the affair. If I hand this briefcase, the original contract, over to you and you publicly exonerate him in the fallout of the Hydrodyne disaster." She stepped closer, tears finally falling. "I messed up everything, Alex, but I'm trying to fix one thing. Take it. Take the contract. I'm signing my part of the divorce papers today, waiving all claims to the house. All I want is to know that when you rebuild, you at least get the credit you deserve. I don't want any part of this anymore. I just want to disappear." I looked from the soot-stained briefcase in her hands, which contained the documented proof of my legal claim, to the shelter door, where Buster was surely waiting. I had just released the world-changing technology for free, thus making the original contract almost worthless commercially, but invaluable legally, the final piece of historical evidence. I took a slow, steady breath, the scent of rain and smoke clinging to her clothes. I extended my hand, not toward the briefcase, but toward her face, gently brushing away a streak of grime. "Sarah," I said, my voice devoid of anger, only exhaustion, "it's too late for a deal, and it's too late for exoneration. Thorne destroyed his own leverage when he blew up that site. We don't need his contract anymore. We have the truth, and now the world has the solution." I looked past her toward the door, where a cheerful bark erupted, and Buster, free and unharmed, bounded into the sunlight toward me. As Buster's familiar weight landed against my legs, I turned back to Sarah, who stood frozen, still clutching the worthless relic of my past marriage. "I'm not taking the contract, Sarah. I'm taking the dog, and then I'm starting over, alone." I reached for Buster's leash, gave Sarah one last unreadable look, and walked away toward the rising sun, leaving Sarah standing exactly where I'd left her, holding the ashes of a life that never should have been mine. But as I clipped the leash onto Buster's collar, I felt a faint vibration in my pocket. It wasn't my phone. It was a small, heavy, unfamiliar key card. I pulled it out. Engraved on the surface, beneath a logo I didn't recognize, were the words, "Executive Access, Sector Gamma, Post-Acquisition Contingency." It was a key to a place I had never heard of, from a source I couldn't trace, and it felt impossibly significant.